Welcome everyone to this webinar on SuccessFactors Time Management. I am Raf. I've been working on time management in and around SAP for well over 25 years now, and the last 5 years of those I've been working more and more on SuccessFactors Time Tracking. With me is my colleague Jens.
Hello, my name is Jens. I have been working as a SuccessFactors consultant at Flexo for 10 years now, and I will be joining Raf.
The reason we're organizing this webinar is that we get a lot of questions from our customers on whether their specific requirements regarding time management can also be met in SuccessFactors. We're hoping to address those questions with this webinar along 3 axes. First, we will show what SuccessFactors Time Management looks like. Then we will present a little bit how we see that SuccessFactors compares with on-premise SAP in the area of time management. And we will conclude the webinar with some lessons that we have learned during the implementations of SuccessFactors Time Management that we have been doing so far. At the end, there will be some time to answer any questions if you still may have those. Before we dive in, it's perhaps good to position the time management offering in SuccessFactors. It's composed of three parts. First of all, there is the leave management and absence management part. That is probably the oldest and probably the most well-known component. This is part of the Employee Central module. There is also a new component, a new module that SuccessFactors has released earlier this year, which is now in early adoption still, and that new module will focus on all the staffing and rostering requirements that you may have. And a third pillar is the timesheet and the time tracking. Originally, or the basis of timesheet are also part of the Employee Central module, but all the nice and exciting advanced features, those are only available in a separate module, which is called time tracking. In this webinar, we will be focusing on the middle part here, the timesheet and time tracking component, because that is where we hear most questions from our customers. All right, let's dive right in.
Yeah, thank you, Raf. We will have a few demos on the timesheet application. During the demo, we will have the SuccessFactors application on the left-hand side of the screen, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you will have a little schematic overview of what exactly is happening. During the first demo, we'll be having a look at the work schedule to begin with. The work schedule, of course, defines the planned working time of an employee, and it is assigned in SuccessFactors in the job information. The job information is a section which is comparable to what you have today in InfoType 1 or InfoType 7 maybe. Here we can assign the work schedule, and the work schedule itself, of course, is a configuration object. Using different day models that we assign over the different days of the week, we can come to a complete work schedule. This work schedule that Billy Brown has been assigned is a 3 weeks rotating schedule of a early, late and night shift. So those kinds of work schedules can be configured in the system, very comparable to how you would do that in SAP HR. That's the base work schedule. On top of that, we can set temporary work schedules. Temporary work schedules override the default work schedule for a temporary period. Very comparable to what you would do today in the InfoType 2003 substitutions in your SAP system. This can be done so shift colleagues can maybe trade shifts to fill in for each other. And we see here the example of Billy in the week where he was assigned the early shift, that on Friday the 19th of June he has been assigned a late shift as a temporary work schedule. The advantage is also that these assignments of temporary work schedules can also be created via external integrations. They are open to APIs, so we can integrate with scheduling tools like Ortec or SAP's own scheduling tool to make those integrations possible. We also have personal experience with working with Ortec, for instance. Once the work schedule is assigned, we of course also need to register some working time. Registering working time can be done in a number of ways. Our employee, Billy Brown, is somebody who is in a positive time evaluation status. So for each day of the week, he needs to indicate his working time. And he will do that by clocking in and clocking out using one of the possible options. We can either have physical terminals, which we can integrate with, or we can have a web clock or the clocking application which is available in the SuccessFactors mobile app. We also have experience with integrating with systems of Interflex and Dormakaba. Using the web clock, as you see it on the left-hand side of the screen, we can configure different types of clock in and clock out that may result in different time types resulting, which you will see in a bit. We will use the web clock here. Once clocked in or clocked out, those clockings get sent to the Manage Clocking page in SuccessFactors, and that's basically the pairing engine. It will pair your clock in and clock out with each other to come to a time pair like you would have in your Teven table today in SAP HR. Non-paired events also get alerted, and people can take action on those non-paired events, as we will see in just a bit. The paired clockings are also available in the timesheet, in the bottom right of the timesheet, and we can see the resulting time pair on the top. A clock in and a clock out pair here results in a working time for the complete duration. Finally then, a clock in correction can also be made. In our configuration, Billy, the employee, is allowed to make that correction himself. And he can do that here directly in the timesheet interface. If needed, it can also be subject to approval that maybe his manager or somebody in HR needs to approve if he makes a correction. Once handled, we will see that this will also result in a working time pair. So that's the basic working of a work schedule and clocking in and clocking out in the timesheet. Now we will have some more detailed examples of how the time valuation can work.
All right, thanks Jens. Right. So all the data has been captured in the system now. Now we want to do some calculations on it. We have chosen to go a little bit beyond the straightforward white-collar flex time example, and we have rebuilt in our demo system use cases that we have seen also at our customers during the implementation. So hopefully those resonate a little bit with situations or requirements that you have in your own company as well. First up is an example of calculating the shift premium. What is the use case here? The number of hours for the shift premium is determined by the planning, but which premium the user gets is determined by the actual clockings. In addition, all the time worked in the nighttime bandwidth, so after 10 p.m., that time should always be paid out with the night shift premium. Okay, let's have a look. So we start off with an empty timesheet. At least there are no clockings, so hours are being paid but without shift premium. Our employee is scheduled in the early shift on Monday, 6 a.m. until 2 p.m. and we will simulate that she indeed clocks in according to the early shift, but a little bit late. You see that she arrives at 6:15 only. The system is configured to automatically deduct a break after 6 hours of work, and you see that break appear in the timesheet as well. And from the clock time of 7 hours and 45 minutes, only 7 hours and 15 are the net working time. Yet, since the planning is 8 hours, you see that there is 8 hours of early shift premium being generated. With this same planning, we will now simulate that the employee clocks in according to the late shift. So in a little bit after 2 p.m. and out a little bit after 10 p.m. The break is adjusted, the net working time is also adjusted. The planned time is still 8 hours, but 10 minutes have been worked after 10 p.m. So for those 10 minutes, you see that there's a night shift premium being generated, and the remainder of the 8 hours, 7 hours and 50 minutes, those are paid with the late shift premium. We can also attach calculation rules to attributes of the work schedule. In this example, you see that at the start, the employee has the regular shift premiums. We will now, as Jens has already explained, assign temporarily a different work schedule to this employee for the same week. This temporary work schedule as an attribute that says that it comes with a dirty work allowance. So when we assign this work schedule to the employee and we refresh the browser that refreshes the timesheet and also reapplies the calculation rules, we see that different wage types have now been generated so that the payroll engine can generate an additional payment for the dirty work allowance. Next up is an example for overtime. We have a dual rule here. At the one hand, all the hours worked above 9 hours per day are always paid out as overtime regardless of what happens in the rest of the week. And then all the hours below 9 hours per day, those are accumulated on a weekly level and set off against the standard working time for that week for this employee. Our employee in this case has a net working time of 9 hours and 45 minutes. In fact, that corresponds with a clock time of 10 hours and a half because an additional 15 minutes of break are deducted after 9 hours. The 45 minutes above 9 are paid as daily overtime. And then the 9 hours that remain, together with the 7 hours on Tuesday and the working time on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that is accumulated on a weekly level and results in an additional 1 hour and a half of weekly overtime. So in total for this week, there is 2 hours and 15 minutes of overtime paid with a 50% premium in this example. With the release earlier this year, the spring release, SuccessFactors released also a feature that is called attendance quotas. And if you have time management in SAP, that probably rings a bell, and it has exactly the same functionality also in SuccessFactors. It allows you to pre-approve overtime or to steer the way the overtime is compensated. In this example, we will use the feature to pay the daily overtime differently from the weekly overtime. So at this moment, they're both paid with a regular tax rate applied. For the daily overtime, which occurred on Monday, the 4th of May, we will now create an attendance quota that says that this overtime for this day should be paid in a tax-friendly way. And when we reapply the calculations, you see that 45 minutes have now been paid with the tax-friendly rate, and the weekly overtime, the other hour and a half, is paid with the regular tax applied. Next up are a couple of smaller examples. The first use case is someone that comes to work by bike. Often in Belgium, people get an additional allowance for that. So the way this works is that usually at the gate where people enter, there is a time terminal, and on this time terminal, people can press a button to indicate that today I came by bike. This information flows into SuccessFactors, and based on that information, we can generate a different entry in the timesheet. And that different entry allows us then to generate a bike allowance for this one day for this person. The next example shows that we can also generate payments based on manual entries in the timesheet. In the example here, I'm registering home office. This code has been configured to require an approval. So the workflow has now been sent to my manager or whoever the workflow is destined for. Normally, the payment of the premium would only result after the approval, but here, for the purposes of the demo, we have configured the system in such a way that the premium is triggered immediately. So we see that now, in addition, there is a home office premium also being generated. SuccessFactors also has a time statement available that is accessible for the employee himself in the timesheet screen, and this resembles, I think, what you will recognize from SAP as well. The time statement can either be sent via email or can be downloaded in PDF if the employee would wish to keep a copy as well. The final example that we will be showing is more in the time off area, but it's a requirement that we often get from customers in the DACH region, the German-speaking countries, where there is the requirement that the flex time account or the overtime time account is regularly capped at a certain level to prevent it from growing too high. In the case that you will see here, we will automatically pay out excessive hours at the end of each quarter, and the threshold above which we pay depends on the number of weekly working hours for the employee. So the threshold is different for each employee depending on the weekly working hours that are configured in job information. The time administrator has a tool, a screen in SuccessFactors that gives an overview of all the time accounts for this employee, and he can also see all the movements of time going in and out of this time account. At the end of the first quarter, you see that the balance of 45 is reduced to 40 because that is the weekly working hours for this employee, and the 5 hours that are above this threshold are paid out automatically. In addition, in this screen, the time administrator can also do manual payouts or make manual corrections to the time accounts if that would be necessary. That was a very brief glimpse. We chose to show a little bit more complicated cases already so that we can demonstrate that SuccessFactors is indeed capable of handling also more advanced requirements that hopefully ring a bell for you in your specific situation.
Yeah. Then we have one demo left, and that's related to approving. Once everything is in the timesheet, we of course need to submit it and approve it. And submitting and approving timesheets in SuccessFactors is a highly configurable process. It can either be done manually, like we just did here on the left-hand side of the screen, or it can also be automated to a certain degree. For instance, automatically submitting timesheets can be configured in such a way that if the timesheet period has passed and the full work schedule period has been booked and there are no manual entries, that we automatically submit that employee's timesheet. The employee doesn't need to go in and do that him or herself. That's one way of automating. Another thing that we can automate is approving. Approving timesheets is something that we can configure, and we can then also automate the approval linked with your payroll calendar. Let's say that 2 days before the monthly payroll closure, we automatically want to approve all outstanding timesheets so that we have all the information to correctly run the payroll. That's also a process that can be configured in SuccessFactors to help smoothen out that process. In this example, we are manually submitting our timesheet for approval, and the approval then goes to our manager, Jeff, in this case. Jeff has access to the timesheet approval center, which we see here on the screen, and here he has all the timesheets that he needs to approve at his disposal. He has some key information here that he can view, like what are the planned times, how many hours are recorded, are there any absences recorded, what are the key facts in this case about unpaired time events, about certain allowances being recorded. All of this is configurable. It can depend on the group of employees which we are treating. Maybe different key facts are important to you to know if you can approve a timesheet or not. In addition, he also has access to alerts that might appear from the time valuation. Those alerts are part of our time valuation scheme, define the business rules that the timesheet should conform to, and he has access to those alerts here as well. Those alerts are also available in another part of SuccessFactors in the admin alerts section. And here, people that have access to the screen can see all the messages that they are permissioned to. And the idea is really that time admins use this screen to work together, to maybe assign the messages to their colleagues, to themselves, and work together to get everything resolved by the end of the month, by the moment the payroll is due. Coming back to our approval center, we still have an example left of related approvals. It could be that for that given timesheet week, there is still an outstanding absence request that needs to be approved. The manager can do that directly here in this screen. He doesn't need to go to somewhere else in the system to do that approval. And finally then, he can also open the timesheet directly using the three dots to make corrections maybe there. To approve, it can either be done one by one, or you can do a mass approval by ticking the box, as we just did here, and approving all of the selected timesheets in one go. Once everything is approved, that data will get shared with the payroll system. We have standard integrations with EC Payroll, of course. We also have a standard connector developed together with Acerta, but any payroll provider we can work with, the data is available to be shared via integrations. That concludes our demos, what we wanted to show you of the timesheet. In the next part of the presentation, we will be having a look at feature parity.
Yes, so how do we feel that SuccessFactors compares to SAP in the area of time management? We will look at this from three angles. First up is planning, then we will look at the time recording, and then finally at the calculations or the time valuations. The area of the planning is more corresponds more with the time off features in SuccessFactors. There we feel that both tools are more or less on par. And it's good to know if that applies to your case or your situation in SAP on-premise at this moment, that also SuccessFactors will be releasing a tool called Dynamic Shift Allocation with the next release later this year. A different aspect is the more dynamic rostering, shift planning, all that sort of features. That is not really a strong point in on-prem SAP. And we already mentioned that SuccessFactors is or has delivered a separate module really targeting these questions. So you could say that SuccessFactors is already ahead of on-prem time management in this area.
Next, with regards to recording, we can see that when talking about absences and attendance types, that there is really feature parity. We can configure any number of absence and attendance types. We can add custom fields. The basic collision checks are there. We can add custom logic by applying take rules. So we would say that there is definitely feature parity with regards to this. Next, we have cost allocation. Cost allocation by standard in SuccessFactors, you can book your hours towards a cost center. You could also add some custom fields to book it towards another object, but it's not the same as doing it in the old SAP system where you have the cross-application timesheet, the CATS transaction at your disposal to really do that in an integrated way. That's also not the goal of SuccessFactors. SuccessFactors will not be replacing CATS of the classic SAP system. Rather, it will work tightly together with the My Timesheet application in the S/4HANA system. The My Timesheet application in S/4HANA is your successor of CATS. It's CATS in a application, in a mobile application, where you can really book your hours on project orders, on work orders, on cost centers, and do that in this application. This will tightly integrate with SuccessFactors. So for instance, here we see that for the Monday, the employee registered some hours, but he went above what was planned according to his work schedule. We see at the bottom of the screen that a valuation message is being shown that this employee has recorded more than is allowed. That message is coming from SuccessFactors. The two applications are integrated and they work together. That's really the idea of how this will work in the future. With regards to mobile time recording, we can say there is feature parity. We have a SuccessFactors mobile app at our disposal. The web page is also fully responsive, so you could also use that on a mobile device. With regards to a mobile web clock and the clock terminals, we are almost there. We still see a small hiccup that when you need to do a manual correction of a clock in and clock out, that you can't simply change the existing clock in and clock out, but you need to really delete and recreate that event. And that proves to be cumbersome for quite some customers. So we're not quite there yet. Next, still also a big gap is mass entry. There is no screen in SuccessFactors that replaces the PTMW that you know from SAP. There is so no way for a time admin to go in and easily manage a group of people together in SuccessFactors. So for instance, if somebody needs to add a collective holiday, that's really a process of importing that data. There is no user interface there. What is good to know, however, is that it is part of the roadmap, it is part of the product vision that SAP is working to a reimagining of the time administrator workbench, where they really want to have that managing a group of employees as part of the solution. But there is still vision, so that's beyond 2027, but it's good to know that SAP is heading in that direction at least. With regards to workflow, there is full feature parity. We can do approvals in SuccessFactors. We can have multi-step approvals. We can send out alerts. We can have customized email messages. The time statement that Raf showed is also there. It's not completely as customizable as it is in SAP, but it should meet most requirements. And then finally, we have the new frontier, AI functionality. That's something that SuccessFactors is clearly on top. We have things like assisted absence recording. You can use the chatbot of SAP, Joule, to help you in creating an absence request and making sure that all attachments are uploaded. There is also a recently released timesheet submission agent that helps you in following up that all timesheets are submitted on time, that all errors are resolved. So those kinds of functionalities will also get added to SuccessFactors in the coming months and years.
In the domain of the calculations, so the time valuations, we have seen SuccessFactors taking big steps forward with every release that has come out over the past years. And we also see a very strong commitment of SuccessFactors to keep up that pace. I already mentioned that the dynamic shift allocation will be released with the next release later this year. The previous release saw the coming of the attendance quotas. In the next release, SuccessFactors will also make it easier for the time calculation engine to access employee master data, and that will, for example, make it easier to implement a solution for a highly diverse population, which was a little bit tricky during the implementations that we've been doing in the past. A highly diverse population, I mean lots of smaller groups of employees that have diverging sets of rules, or if you have multiple collective labor agreements in your company, and people can easily cross over from one agreement to another, or there's hybrid people working in between two collective labor agreements. That sort of requirement was until now more difficult to implement in SuccessFactors, and that will definitely become more easy after the next release. Other gaps that we see are in very specific domains or subdomains of time management. An example is for instance, if your calculation is not based on the planning or the actual recordings, but rather on, for example, a very specific absence counting rule, that is a little bit tricky to implement at this moment. And also, if you need to do calculations over longer periods of time, that is also something that needs to be handled in a thoughtful way, and sometimes needs a little bit of a creative solution. For Belgian customers, it's important to note that the illness interpretation is not part of SuccessFactors, or at least not yet. So what you know from SAP, RPT Gen B0, that is something that functionality will need to be handled in your payroll engine. And as Jens already mentioned, that is a gap for many customers at this moment, is that SuccessFactors is lacking true decentral time management and application. That brings us to the lessons that we've learned in the implementations that we've been doing so far.
Yeah, and there we have a bit of a recommended approach. We have some guidelines to share with you. The first one is that doing a project like this is not a lift and shift. There is no migration tool available to copy over all the customizing from SAP HR to SuccessFactors. It's really a brand new implementation. So that means that we really need to know where you want to end up, what are your processes, what are your requirements, and if possible, try to harmonize, take the opportunity to harmonize some of those requirements. When trying to get to that picture, we often face the fact that there is a long-standing history. Your current SAP time engine or other time engine might be running for quite some time, and there might be little details in there that are the way that they are. Does somebody in the company still know why it is like that? Is all of that knowledge still in-house, or maybe do we need to do some reverse engineering to come up with why certain things are the way that they are? From experience, we learned that we typically need some time to do some of that reverse engineering in projects to come up with those requirements. When doing that, it's also important to try and cover everything, try to take a holistic approach. For instance, thinking about the cross-application timesheet functionality. Are you using that? What is your plan there in the future? Are you maybe moving to an S4 system or not? What is your payroll strategy? Are you using EC payroll? Are you moving to a third-party provider or other strategies? What planning tools are you using? Do we need to integrate with those planning tools? What expectations do we have of reporting? All of those things should be taken together when devising the plan for the project. The next topic is change, that Raf will tackle.
Yes, the first one is very obvious. It goes for any software implementation. The more you can stick to the standard of the tool, the more robust your solution will be, the smoother your implementation will be, and the more you will be at ease if you need to make your solution evolve in the future when, for example, legislation changes or whatever. So that is a very common to any software tool. More specific for the move from on-premise SAP Time Management to SuccessFactors is that you really need to take into account and to keep in mind that that there is a massive difference between an on-prem tool with a web front-end and a true native cloud application. SuccessFactors is much more strict when it comes to the layout, the UI, the way of working, and also the technical framework than is the case for SAP on-premise. So that is something that you really need to keep in mind. Of course, we all know that the functional rules regarding time management, they are what they are. They cannot be bent. They cannot be renegotiated. But as Jens mentioned, you should really see this project as a new start for your time management application, and it can also be an opportunity to perhaps challenge the way you're doing things now. Is it really necessary that Department A does things in a different way than Department B? All those little exceptions that have grown over the years, are they really still necessary? Does anyone even know why they are there? Do you need to keep them? So it can be an opportunity to also simplify your solution and harmonize maybe the rules within your organization. Of course, within the boundaries of the legal legislations and the collective labor agreements. Finally, it's also very important to keep an eye on your end users from the start. Often the benefits for IT and the benefits for HR, they are very obvious when you move from SAP to SuccessFactors, but there is also a huge change coming for your end users. So it's important to take them along from the very start of the project, because a project like this impacts people's money and people's vacation, and there's hardly any subject that is less sensitive than those two. Finally, the recommendations that we have given on the previous slides, it's clear that that takes time. So it's important that you do take your time to make a decent preparation, because it will always pay itself back. Don't just jump into the implementation. Take your time to prepare yourself very well and set out, plant a flag of where you want to go to. Also, of course, it's important that you choose a good implementation partner to take you along on that journey. And with regards to that, it's good to know that the skills that you need to implement the time valuations in SuccessFactors, they are really specific to this module. They're unlike any other module in SuccessFactors. So it's important that you pick a partner that has experience really in this module. And in addition, the partner should also be able to talk to you on a functional level, because he can help you identify the gaps between your functional requirements and the technical framework of SuccessFactors. And together you can also then design the solution that is the best fit for your specific case and your specific circumstances. A small remark perhaps, but if you would consider to go offshore for your implementation partner, keep in mind that the complexity that we see here in Western Europe is unseen and often incomprehensible for people from other parts of the world. So that can be a point of attention as well. Of course, we from Flexo, we think we check all the boxes to be a good implementation partner, but we definitely don't think we're the only ones. You should really pick an implementation partner that has the experience, but also that fits your company culture, because a time management project is often a relatively long-running project. So you need to look for a partner that you can work with on the long term, also after the implementation, because there will always be follow-up and evolutions in your solution. So pick a good partner and involve them early on in the project. That was about what we wanted to tell you from content-wise. We are happy to take any questions if you may have some, and try to answer them as good as we can. Okay, first question. Is it now also possible to book against projects or order numbers, for example, in construction for technicians? That relates to...
Yeah, so that
CATS.
relates to the CATS functionality. So as we explained, it depends a bit on what your use case is. Do you really want a tightly integrated way of booking against those project orders and have them immediately linked into your material system or finance system? Then we need to look at the My Timesheet application in S/4HANA. If it is more a scenario of no, it's also okay if we add some customization to SuccessFactors, add those orders there, and we can export that data and manually send it to the receiving system, then we can use SuccessFactors. It depends a bit on your landscape and what the exact requirement is.
All right. Can approval also be split across different approvers based on, for example, cost center or order, where different approvers are responsible? That relates to workflow?
I think so. I would have to test that out. In the workflow engine, we are basically using the same workflow functionality that we have available in Employee Central. We trigger that workflow via a business rule, and in the business rule we have access to a lot of data. So I'm not 100% sure on that, but I would definitely like to try that out.
If we manage internally the PCR as the management of time rule can stay internally once a project is implemented, or the complexity does not allow it. That's a bit of a tricky question. Basically, technically you can manage the calculation rules yourselves. However, it is very specific. If you have a very complicated setup or complicated requirements, it's maybe difficult to oversee all the implications if you make a change. I would say that if you would want to do it internally, you would have to build up some experience first and regularly refresh that experience too. So it depends a bit on how often you will need to be making changes. If it's like once every 2-3 years a change, then probably it's a bit risky if you would do it yourself. But technically it is possible, of course. All
Okay.
right.
I think then if there are no more questions, then I would like to thank everybody for attending. I hope you learned something new today. We will share the recording and the materials with every one of you. And of course, if you still have questions or remarks, feel free to reach out. And then maybe hopefully till next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.